Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, the Booth Boys are back in business and the Nuggets are going streaking. We'll break down the Nuggets 5-0 homestand and set the expectations for the young players and the team for the weeks ahead. But first, we have some big injury news that could affect the entire picture of the Western Conference. Finally, Will and I are going to test the courage of our convictions as our preseason predictions come under the test of reality. Stay tuned. Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with my co-host Will Jones. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm actually feeling good about the Nuggets. We've had a very good streak of wins and games that we're going to get into, so I feel good about that. But there are some other news items around the league, especially these injuries, and so those fans may be not feeling great right now.
I think you might be surprised a bit at the tone I take when we get to talking about the Nuggets later on in the show.
Spicy.
I might be just like in my contrarian mood, but I feel the need to temper some of the expectations for the team. But it is good to for them to have, stabilized after this very rocky start.
Yeah.
The Emirates NBA Cup starts tonight. The NBA finally started calling it the NBA Cup because in-season tournament sounded dumb, but only after they got a sponsor in Emirates. So, we got that Emirati money flowing into the league. We're recording today a couple days after the Nuggets win over the Dallas Mavericks, and we'll be back after another Dallas Mavericks game, the NBA Cup game, in a couple of weeks. So look out for that. But in between now and then, the Nuggets are actually going to be taking a tour of the Southwest Division, actually, that actually started with their last game against the Dallas Mavericks. So that should be an interesting schedule because I think that division is pretty strong this year. But yeah, well, let's get into the news here. First big news item on the injury report is that Chet Holmgren is going to be out for at least 8 to 10 weeks with an iliac fracture. The first statement that was put out by the Oklahoma City Thunder, a status update or a return to play protocol would be provided in 8 to 10 weeks, not that he would be back in 8 to 10 weeks. What was your reaction to this news when you first saw it?
I mean, it's undeniable that it's a huge piece of news. They're heavy favorites, I guess you could say, in the West, since they look like the best team, like the most
heavy
solid
hitters.
Yeah,
they've been godlike defensively.
The best defense in the league. They were undefeated.
Maybe in a generation.
Whatever. I feel a little bit silly talking about it when I'm thinking about the Wolves last year and everyone's saying, this is the best defense we've seen in forever.
This was far and away better than even that. It was crazy.
Nuggets gave them the first loss, of course, but yeah, it's just it changes everything. We were waiting to see how iHeart returning would work with Chet, because then, who's playing center, how those, obviously iHeart's going to play center, but I think the Thunder probably are better when Chet's playing center. So I don't know how that's all going to work out. And I was interested to see how that balance looked and how the offense and the defense looked. I think the Nuggets did really good against the Thunder, attacking them in the post, and we'll talk about that specifically. So just Chet being out, it's exposing more of their weaknesses, and he's hugely important to them.
They gave up a 130-something offensive rating to the Clippers a couple nights ago. This is their first full game without Chet. Actually, in the game they lost, Chet was versus the Golden State Warriors. Chet was going up to contest a shot at the rim by Andrew Wiggins, and he just kind of went sideways and fell and fractured his hip there, just awful. Yeah, Chet's reaction while sitting in the hospital bed after all this was, I can't believe this MFer made the lay. WTF, I'm pissed. And then, really tough for such a young player who already missed his rookie season out with, the foot injury, and then to be on a team that is this good and is so, that he's so important for. So this is the message that he put out to Oklahoma City Thunder fans. Can't tell if I feel better or worse about this, having been through something similar before. On one hand, I know how to approach it. I know what to do, what not to do, and how beautiful the other side is. But on the other hand, I felt frustration of this process and the wear it puts on your mind. Most of all, I'm hurt I can't help my teammates and play for our fans and supporters for a while. Everyone who sticks with me and our team, along with my need for hoops, is a big part of my passion to return. Don't pity me or feel bad. There's lots of people out there right now with real problems that don't heal. Anyways, excuse my rambling. Just wanted to address our OKC fans and family. Thoughts from the hospital bed. 7. Really tough, right? I mean, he's saying all the things that you want to hear from a player in this situation, especially, again, a very young player. I believe Chet is, he's 22. I think he just turned 22 recently also. So he's Peyton Watson's age.
When you get players like this who have bodies that aren't typical, who are really tall or skinny, or if you're like a Zion where you're built like an NFL linebacker, people have all kinds of comments and speculations about your injury frequency. You know, the one where he got injured
but
playing
this was
against...
like a freak thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's nothing you could do with that. It's just going to happen. So
when you fall horizontal directly onto your hip, like that's just...
I just saw the injury and I thought this might be okay. It might just be like a bone bruise, might be like a contusion or something, whatever. But if
you hit it at just the right angle, you put pressure at that.
The diagnosis was way more severe than I thought.
The thing is, in the short term, I think it's going to affect them dramatically because, like I said, they were able to pull out that game versus the Clippers the other night, by the way. Part of the problem is because of how aggressive OKC likes to play on the perimeter, they end up leaving a lot of holes to be plugged, basically. And Chet was really good at plugging those holes, especially when it came to protecting the rim. Like they have the best rim defense in the NBA this season. I don't think that that's going to continue, at least for now. And the reason I say it's going to affect them more in the short term is because obviously Isaiah Hartenstein has been out, but OKC is also a team that is incredibly, even with Chet, incredibly predicated on forcing turnovers on the perimeter, and they're still going to do that. Just like they were in the season where they were missing Chet. People forget they finished top 12 in defense that year. So the defense is going to be able to keep up. I'm actually more curious how this impacts their offense. You'd think like, oh, they get to go micro even more of the time. But Chet adds another dimension to their offense that isn't there even when they go their super small ball 5 out with his screening and his roll gravity. The other guys on that team do not have roll gravity. This was something that I thought they didn't exploit Chet's roll gravity enough in that Mavs series until the end of it when it was too late. I'm more curious about how it impacts them on both ends of the floor, but I don't think there's going to be the dramatic drop off that everyone is necessarily expecting, but it might just be enough to give other teams the opportunity to climb into that top spot.
That's all I really care about. Like they're not going to fall down to a play-in team or anything. It's just like, whoa, they were going to be the runaway.
They were a play-in team without Chet the entire year.
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the 1 seed is just, they were going to run away with it. It was kind of looking like, even though the Warriors and other teams and Suns, they're putting up crazy regular season numbers right now. And it just changes things in the West, just plain and simple.
This is just one other thing, because it was something I was already skeptical about with OKC this year is their on-ball creation. When they got rid of Giddey and didn't replace that with another on-ball creator like that. They were really relying on both Chet and J-Dub to continue to develop in that role. And Chet really was starting to, like we saw in that first game versus OKC and the Nuggets, like Chet was killing us on ball with his drives and everywhere, right? So that's another just layer that they're missing now. They can put in another like small guard, but their guards aren't really, really strong, high level on ball creators. And so that is something that I think is going to suffer.
Well, let's talk about some of the other injuries.
Yeah, so I'll just go through a few of these because there are so many. So Paul George and Trey Murphy have both returned to the floor since the last time we talked about some of the big injury updates of the league. But some of the big names that are still out are Kawhi, Chris Middleton, and Joel Embiid. But we have some more fresh wreckage of the season since Since we last talked about this, Kevin Durant is going to be out with a few weeks with a calf strain. Tyrese Maxey is out with a hamstring, and this Sixers team has already been through so much, so we're not going to see the big three of Embiid, Paul George, and Maxey on the floor together for a while. Just want to point out that actually both Kevin Durant and Tyrese Maxey were leading the league in minutes per game before their respective injuries. And, Kevin Durant is 36 years old. So crazy that he was second in minutes. Zion Williamson, another hamstring issue. It's one of those things, I don't even know if it's like a blaming conditioning thing anymore at this point. It's just with these soft tissue injuries, like they're just so finicky. Speaking of freak athletes, Ja Morant, a hip subluxation injury again versus the Lakers. Is third year in a row that Ja gets injured while playing the Lakers.
It's pure coincidence.
The Grizzlies should just sit him in those games. We had Scotty Barnes suffer an orbital fracture in the first game that the Nuggets played against the Raptors this season. It was like a freak thing where like Pirtle.
Yeah. Sorry, Scotty.
Flipped back and hit Jokic, and that momentum took him into Scotty's eye. Hope, and he'll be back at some point this season, of course. The Mavs are without Derek Lively. They were without him for the game that the Nuggets played against them. Malik Monk is out with an ankle thing. That was a more recent development. And of course, the Nuggets are missing Aaron Gordon with a calf strain. So, which one like stands out at you as being like one of the more impactful of these? Because these are just the big names, obviously.
I mean, John, Durant, and Maxey, I think, are the biggest. I mean, they're super high level established starters. I think Zion is just Zion, always big questions about him, and he's been injured a lot. He misses so many games throughout his career. So here's another one. So that just kind of sucks to see. The other ones are just kind of like accidents and tweaks. Man, the Mavs really miss Derek Lively against the Nuggets. Holy shit. Yeah, I think sometimes fans want to like macro narrative the injuries and say like, oh, the league has a problem because of this, and that's why these injuries are happening. Or like they'll blame the bodies of athletes or whatever. But I don't know. It just seems kind of like a mixed bag of just really unfortunate injuries.
You hear that, guys? Will is in the bag for Adam Silver. And the Players Association, frankly, because nobody wants to lower the number of games in the season for money reasons.
I guess you could maybe say if we weren't playing back-to-backs or playing every other day, would these injuries still be happening?
But these are like early in the season, so it's hard. Like, yeah. I get it. I get what you're saying about people like trying to shoehorn that narrative in. A lot of this stuff is like either lingering stuff from the summer or just like freak stuff that happened early in the season.
Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I want Aaron Gordon to come back. I was at that game that he got hurt and was hoping he would just walk it off. But yeah, calf strain. Calf strains, I'm starting to really hate calf strains.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan. Let's turn to a brighter note, Will. Jamal Murray was spotted with his daughter at this was at the Mavs game, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right before the Mavs game in Denver. Right
before the Mavs game. She is so cute. She looks just like him.
I know. It's so wild.
And my question for you on this is it a coincidence that she was dressed like a minion? Because the Nuggets have leaned so far into this Minions thing ever since Jokic was in that movie promo.
That is an interesting theory. Jamal bringing her out on the court knows photographs are going to be taken. The Nuggets are going to post it on social media.
Oh, yeah. Like this looked like a kind of cute little planned photo
like a coordinated
thing. Also because like it wasn't super public knowledge about Jamal having a daughter in the first place. I don't think this was like a spontaneous.
Yeah. Some fans definitely had no idea. Some fans had heard.
I think most people had no idea.
I think we even talked about it maybe privately. I don't think we talked about it on the show, but like when he was struggling in the playoffs, we were like,
talk about it on the show.
Like, Jamal, he just had a kid. So we were talking about that together. I mean, Aaron Gordon said something where he maybe like ratted Jamal out.
Yeah, he kind of ratted him out on that podcast where he talked about his baby girl. And I thought that it was like a significant other.
Yeah.
Because you can also read it as that. But yeah. Oh my God, she's so cute though. Like, I just want to munch her up. Anyway.
Yeah.
No
Hopefully
eating,
this is
baby.
a good boost to Jamal's morale and like gives him some perspective. You know, you have a kid who knows how it can change someone's
Yeah,
perspective.
we need
So
that. We need that girl dad bump, like
yeah, I mean,
right
this
now.
is a real thing in hockey. I don't know if you've heard that, but players who have kids, like the season that they're a new dad, supposedly have like amazing career year seasons. So,
Like, I'm worried that Jamal let it expire.
well, I guess yeah, it was last season really his.
I mean, he was like good in the regular season. He just couldn't stay healthy, unfortunately. Well, hopefully we get like a delayed girl dad bump. I'm rooting for it.
There's still a chance. All right, well, let's actually talk about how the Nuggets have been doing. I think the last time we talked was after the Jazz game. The Nuggets have had 4 games since then. It's been 5-0 run on their home stand. Yeah, so they played the Raptors, where they won a very close game, 121-119 at home. Then a really crazy win against the Thunder without Jamal and Aaron Gordon. Another one that came down to the wire. It's a theme of the Nuggets season so far. Just like the other team having offensive possession and going for the win. And the Raptors game, it was a 3 that rattled in and out. I was at that game. I thought it was in, and then Russ was defending it pretty well. I thought maybe they'll call a foul, but you know, it's home game. It's hard to call a foul like on the last shot like that. Just like give the game to a team. So the Thunder was wild, interesting dynamics in that game. You see this short kind of rotation with the Nuggets really competing at a high level.
I mean, I didn't think they shortened the rotation. I think AG was out. Hunter Tyson played
Yeah.
big minutes in that game, actually. And so did Zeke. I
Yeah,
thought we
well,
actually opened up the rotation quite a bit in that game.
I guess that's true. It fits the theme of the Nuggets like only playing
Yeah.
8 or 9 guys just by necessity in that game in this case. Then a game against the Heat where we were, you know, had a 10-point lead, then it was tied, then we got back up by
I
however
mean, we had
many.
like a 17-point lead at one point in that first quarter.
And that was nice to see the Nuggets kind of like handle a team. They scored 135 points. The Heat's defense had nothing for the Nuggets in that game, but we'll talk about that too.
Well,
And
the Nuggets
then,
had almost nothing for the Heat's offense.
yeah, that was an offensive game. That was an
We're
offensive
not gonna talk
game.
about that right now.
Like every game ended up, besides the Nuggets Heat game, because the Nuggets got 135 points around the 120 mark, all of them. It's really weird. Raptors
Which is like
119,
that little
121.
threshold where like the Nuggets win like a lot of their games when they score over 120 and then substantially fewer when they score less than that.
And it was like same with the Mavs game. Kyrie was just going. He had 43 points, just an offensive explosion. The Nuggets similarly were doing pretty well on offense. I thought the Mavs defense was pretty bad in that game when I went back to look at it, but they didn't have Lively. I think that was a big part of it. I didn't think Gaffer did well. I didn't think Powell did very well either. So that game also came down to a final possession where Kyrie took a 3 and missed it. So similar themes.
Couple of final possessions.
Yeah, when I was done at the Raptors game, and that was a close one, I'm like, I don't know how many more of these close games I can handle because we had already had so many up to that point. And then every game after that, besides the Heat game, was the same.
Actually, could you talk a little bit about being at the Raptors game in person, because Will actually went to that game.
I got to go on the court beforehand because my nephew won like this raffle at his school, and so he took me along, and you just get to go and shoot around. And first look at the Nuggets for me in person this season, and I think one of the biggest things I noticed was how fast the young guys are, like Christian and Strawther and Pwat. Pwat is looking better lately. Obviously, we've seen his amazing defensive plays where his explosiveness is back and his athleticism is back.
And it seemed, I think that Raptors game, the second half especially, was when it, like, I really started to see that come back.
Yeah,
for him,
sure.
or like manifest itself on the court anyway.
He hit a go-ahead 3 in that game. That was like everyone just went crazy, and it was like so cool to see him pumped up by that play and like get some confidence back. And his 3 has been pretty good so far, or like since then. I think he didn't miss a single 3 against the Mavs. Yeah, one of the things that I was wondering about is I just thought MPJ looked a little slow, and I couldn't tell if that was new because he's a pretty tall guy. He's got massive feet and legs that he's got to carry around. He looks skinny, so you almost might think he might be one of those really fast people, kind of like Pwat is, but you know, he's had injuries and back issues, so it's not like he's dunking over people super athletically all the time, though he can do that occasionally. We had talked about his defense kind of not being great. I think his on-ball's been a little slow, like the blow-bys were pretty brutal. starting the season. His off ball's always been like a struggle, right? He could improve in a lot of ways, but his rotation defense has been good. I think he's still been behind on rotating and help defense and going for blocks and giving and ones, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a true thing or not, but his offense has been amazing the past couple of games, and
When
he's
you,
like
you
getting
don't know
back
if
in
it's a
form.
true
So
thing, you don't know if it's like gonna continue.
Like, I
or-
don't know if it's like he put on more weight and he's kind of slow and he can't really stay with defenders, or if that's just how he's always been playing and he's just got to like lock in a little bit.
So having been at the Raptors game, because I want to talk about like the kind of higher level opponents that the Nuggets faced in this stretch a little bit more, but I want to know, in your opinion, having been there in person,
Mm-hmm.
what was it about the way that the Raptors played, or like how the Nuggets came out in that game, that made it so damn close again, right? They beat the
Yeah.
Raptors in overtime in Toronto just like a week and a half ago.
Very skilled, quick guards like Grady Dick just shooting the hell out of the ball and torching us. And CB
Yeah.
is a great defender, but obviously he's got a lot of work to do with the very, very quick guards. And everyone is wondering, how should we guard Grady Dick? Should we put Pwat on him instead? Who's going to take him in the second half because he's going off? We kind of just kept CB on him throughout the game, and he did okay in some spots and did better. I don't know. Pwat, I was still worried about his lateral quickness with his injury and whether or not he would have been able to keep up
Also,
with
like
Dick a ton. But
he's not been the most laterally quick guy even before the injury. His on-ball defensive footwork is like, let's just say he gets a lot of margin for error because of his dimensions, but it's not like the most fundamentally sound stuff.
I'm really wondering about what the limits even are to his defensive versatility, because we've seen him play center and then we see him guarding from the 2 spot, and I'm just like feeling all this out.
Yes, but the Raptors game, you think it was mostly just like the perimeter creation that did them in, and like the inability
Perimeter
to
creation. I
contain.
think Pirtle was being really aggressive. He fouled out of the game, but I think like that was a part of it, and like his floater and just like his inside touch was killing us.
I think I think they were playing a lot up at the level, and like nobody was rotating to Pirtle in time, or or giving like Jokic enough time to recover. And Jokic also wasn't recovering super well. Like it was like a lot, in my opinion.
But
to
also,
me, like the turnovers were the biggest story of that game more than anything, which is like, this has been the Raptors for years now. Like it doesn't matter what the personnel is. Like they force turnovers, they get out and run. And they do it especially well against the Nuggets over the last few years, which is why these games are like always close, regardless of how good or mid the Nuggets happen to be.
I think that's
time
been a theme over the homestand too, is that's when the teams are really getting back into the game. It's just like we have one quarter with a lot of turnovers, whether it's like Russ and Jokic or whoever. It's just like weird little getting careless with the ball. Like I think that was the case in the Heat game too. Yeah, in the second quarter,
Heat like
so
to force
many
turnovers as well. Like that is like their MO.
Yeah, the second quarter was just so many turnovers, just throwing passes across the court and weird, like risky, bold decisions that were just getting picked off.
Yeah, we're gonna get a bit more into the Heat game, but we have to talk about the best win of this stretch, which I think is easily the game versus the Thunder. Right? They were up like 10 in the first half. They pushed it out to like 16 at one point in the third quarter, and it looked like, okay, like they're gonna handle the Nuggets again, right? But yeah, the Nuggets were down Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray, and the Thunder had Chet in that game. So this is before Chet's injury. They were still without Isaiah Hartenstein as he continues to recover from his injury, his preseason injury. It looked like OKC was just pretty soundly outplaying them. I thought that the starters did a good job, and Russ ended up starting because Jamal was out, but he's like there with the starting unit. This is with Peyton Watson starting again in Aaron Gordon's position. So that's like another 5-man group that actually was doing well enough to stay close within the game. But then we had this just god awful bench stint with Jokic off the floor. And then the Thunder started to make another run, and they were able to push their lead out to like 16 or 17 points off of turnovers, off of some sloppy passes. And then the second half of the third quarter comes in, and the Nuggets go on, I think it was like a 9-0 run where they were like getting stops, getting out, running, and then generating good 3-point looks. Like Russ hit a 3 in that stretch, and PJ hit a 3 in that stretch. I think Julian also hit a 3 in that stretch. And they ended up tying the game by the end of the third quarter, which was shocking to me. Russ had a crazy night in that game, 29.6 rebounds, 6 assists. And he helped kind of keep the game afloat in the non-Jokic minutes in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest note that I had about that third quarter, like that was a 40-point third quarter, was
it really?
Yeah, for the Nuggets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Jokic had 9 rebounds. That was like a game that was coming down to the wire. Like it was a clutch time game. But I think Jokic had like 1 point in like the fourth quarter.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It was all assisted. It was all assists. That's how he was controlling the game in that fourth quarter. And I want to specifically shout out the lineup of Jokic and MPJ with Christian, Julian, and Peyton. Because when we talk about the game was tied up going to the fourth, and then Russ kind of keeps them afloat. They're kind of trading baskets between them and OKC for the beginning of the fourth quarter. Jokic comes back in. They're the ones that go on the run that gives Denver a big enough lead to whether OKC like trying to chip their way back into the game. Jokic is able to weaponize particularly Christian, but also Russ as cutters on his post-ups when you have lineups that are somewhat lacking shooting. But when you look at that lineup, when you have both Julian and MPJ on the floor, that provides some versatility in how you can kind of line people up when you're running those like empty side post-ups for Jokic. And that lineup has just continued to do well since that OKC game. Friend of the show, CT Fazio, has been clamoring for the no point guard lineup. I think we probably have already played it more this season than all of last year.
Yeah, Russ obviously played point guard in that game and had a massive game. I just couldn't believe, or I mean, maybe I should have believed it, but the decision making that he was demonstrating in that game was just decision making was shocking, solid.
In that it was so good.
Just shot choices, the passing, like the when to drive. Like, I mean, we've seen him take some questionable decisions. Yeah, ill-advised decisions in some other games, but like
not advised.
The boxes that he was checking down the list in that game was almost pristine.
And, we'll talk about some of the regression he had in some games after that, but I'm glad that we got that game out of him versus his old team because we needed everything in that game. I will say the other thing that surprised me about it was Russ finally making layups. I think he made all of his layups in that game. Like every one that he makes feels like found money at this point. It felt very like it doesn't matter how close the game was. The fact that they were able to battle back into the game and then win it outright, like doesn't matter how it happened. Like that was an impressive win for me. Okay, let's get into the Miami Heat game. So Jamal Murray comes back in this game from the concussion protocol. He got a concussion during the Timberwolves game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you one of the people that was at all worried about the chemistry of like how the team had been playing, just being like even a little off once Jamal came back?
I was curious and just to see, I mean, like I said on the last episode, him getting back to normal and being super effective and just killing teams is what is going to be the most important for the Nuggets. So I was more excited just for him to come back as soon as possible. And just like, if there are chemistry concerns, then just grind it out and keep figuring it out.
We talked about like in your summary of the games, the reason that the Nuggets were able to get out to such a big lead to start the game is because they were just running on Miami. It was really interesting how, I mean, Spo likes to use his zone, not sparingly, but he likes to use it in spurts. But after that, the first half of the first quarter, he was full court pressing like every possession down because he could not, like the Heat could not deal with the Nuggets in transition. They had to make sure that they were stopping them, and that was with Jamal on the floor, that they were still running. I think Jamal, he wasn't walking the ball up. Often he was like, if someone gave it to him after a rebound, he was like immediately like passing it up the floor. So it's not like he was necessarily like, he's not like Russ in transition where he was, barreling down while dribbling the ball. But I thought he was playing with great pace, getting to his spots off ball in transition and semi-transition. I think that really helped out. So I was happy to see it. I'm curious to see if that continues.
Yeah, I don't think Jamal alone could be someone that could really slow a pace down, especially when you
Right.
got,
If everyone else is like, they're like,
yeah,
no, you got to keep up with us now. And maybe that's like a little bit of what's happening as well.
yeah, because you got Russ and Pwat and CB, and I think just them being young, and I think they're obviously their play styles lend itself to that. There's not a ton Jamal can do. Like he can stop the ball in the half court, and as far as transition, he always is like whether he has the ball, he might do a pull up three, or he'll just run to the 3 point line and spot up if the ball gets stopped in the paint, or he'll go to the corner, and we saw Russ like hit him for a corner three.
We talked about Jamal, getting to his spots early in transition and semi-transition and really being willing to pull from three. I want that to continue, but I am so skeptical that it's going to continue. Part of what happened in the Heat game is, like I said, they were zoning up like every possession down just to stop the Nuggets transition game. So there wasn't like a pace and space aspect to Jamal's game in the second half. But there were also a lot of plays where guys are going under on screens and he's not really hunting the pull-up three anymore in the second half of that game. And so he had 10 attempts, but only 8 of them were in the first half. But I think that Jamal is going to need to hunt his 3-point shot a lot more this season because of the Nuggets spacing concerns.
Yeah, so I agree with your points about him being off and on ball in transition, semi-transition. Even in the half court, I liked some of what they did. I thought, oh, are they emphasizing Jamal being off ball more? Because like you'd set a fake screen in the corner, and then there was like a zoom action where someone set a screen for him, and then he got a handoff and hit a three off of that, or shot a three.
We love running that play, but it was nice to see it again. And
he still had his possessions where he was on ball or running pick and roll, or like going to a
especially once
jumper.
Miami started pressing, because in my opinion, Jamal was totally essential both particularly actually in the non-Jokic minutes at busting Miami's zone. Malone actually went to the Russ and Jamal lineups. It was good because you had 2 point guards on the floor who like knew like where to be to break the zone and could make the right connective passes and all of that. For all our complaints about it, that look was essential for busting the Heat's zone because they were struggling with it. Malone actually goes to a Peyton Watson at the 5 look. So it was Russ, Jamal, Julian, MPJ, and Peyton, I believe. Peyton was really helpful in breaking the zone as well. He just knew where to slip or cut to, and we talked about him and Russ running this versus the Nets. Malone talked about wanting to get Peyton on the floor at the 5, and I think he was there at the 4 in the first half, just to take advantage of some of that versatility. And part of that versatility is he has great court awareness. I was looking back through some of my old tweets from last year, and I talked about how Peyton was so essential at busting a zone versus the Phoenix Suns in a game that they played last year. Another way that he did that, so he gets to the right spot in the zone and he's able to hit this elbow midi, because we talked about this with, we have, or lots of people have. We saw it in the finals in 2023. Once Jokic got to the middle of the zone, he could hit his floater, he could get to the rim, whatever it was, like the zone is cooked. And Peyton was able to do the same thing, just hitting the elbow midi, and that was really helpful. What did you think? What were you thinking when Malone rolls out this Peyton at the 5 lineup in the fourth quarter of this game?
Confused, just because I never know. I've apparently have no idea what position Pwat's supposed to play. I'm like,
there was no center on the floor. He was the biggest, he was kind of he was playing the role of center, at least on offense, but we'll talk a little bit about how that went defensively when we get to his segment in the show.
I mean, last season when he was taking off, there were questions about whether he could take over in bigger positions, whether that's in the 4 or the 5. Like, that was huge kind of speculation, big, bold questions. And people almost shrugged it off because he's pretty skinny, doesn't have a lot of size, muscle-wise to handle some of those players. But in this case, where it was like, yeah, you just need like a skilled guard to get in there, or skilled forward to get in there and slip, or just flash to the center of the paint and get a shot is cool. I was impressed that he was able to hit that midi because, his offensive game has been a question. So the fact that he was able to complete a tomahawk dunk and hit a mid-range shot was pretty impressive. Good on Malone for being like creative.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, what the hell is going on right
Yeah.
now? But hey, look, like we got Peyton Watson at the 5 in a 2-point guard lineup, very small. But again, it's the Miami Heat, and you kind of have to do some different things versus them. And they also don't necessarily have the personnel to fully take advantage of that. I think it was a good look to go to in a spurt. I'm not, I'm not playing Peyton Watson at backup 5 for the remainder of the season or anything like that. That's not that's not the solution. But reports of his washedness were greatly exaggerated.
We know that the Nuggets lost their first 2 games of the season. Now we're winning more games. Those games could have easily been lost if some players on the opposing team made some shots. Or if Jokic wasn't playing as many minutes, maybe our record would be way worse. What have been your thoughts on how we've looked on this whole homestand before we get to the Mavs specifically?
First of all, just good to see the Nuggets go up against high-level competition. Like something that really stood out to me ever since the first Raptors game was how different regular season basketball is than playoff basketball. It is just a lot of slop in the regular season, especially when you're not playing high-level competition. So it was good to see them play, the Thunder, the Heat, and the Mavs. I do think that offensively, the Nuggets impressed me way more than they did defensively.
Yeah, I agree.
By far. Like, it's not close. And they showed some ingenuity in shorthanded situations offensively versus very specific kinds of high-level defense. In the case of OKC, it's like the way that they swarm and recover and how difficult they make it on not just Jokic, but everybody on the floor. Obviously, we talked about the zone with the Miami Heat. And then Dallas, they were missing Lively, but they still had Gafford, who's had really good rim protection numbers again this season. I think that I learned a lot about the Nuggets offensively in this stretch in a good way, but I'm going to temper that a little bit once we dig more into the actual offensive numbers. But what was your general impression of the team in this stretch?
I thought MPJ's offense stood out a lot. He's starting out these games pretty hot, just like hitting threes or whatever. He hit that floater at the end of the Mavs game. Malone had been emphasizing defense. I think now it seems that the offense looks much more impressive.
It's not close, unfortunately.
Yeah. They have like these offensive-centric games where the defenses are struggling on both ends. If the Nuggets could just figure out their defense a little bit more, slow down some of these skilled guards, these games could be a lot easier. But so far, they're just doing just enough to win the game. I like your points about the unique styles that each team has brought. We're going to talk about Jokic in the post and those double teams. I think every team had been doubling.
He's getting doubled on, I think, 40% of his post-ups this season. And I think it wasn't higher than like 33 or something last year or over the last 3 years. So that's like something to note as well.
I think the Thunder were doing it. The Mavs definitely tried to do it. I think a lot of the teams were uncoordinated in that attempt.
I would say the OKC was probably the most coordinated, which is why it was impressive what they did to specifically attack the coordinated doubling. Versus the Thunder.
Exactly. They know when they're supposed to rotate. Maybe they mess it up here or there. We'll show that later. But I thought the Mavs definitely messed up a lot. I think Gafford, there was one possession where CB was wide open in the dunker spot and got an easy dunk, and Luka looked at Gafford like, what the hell are you doing? You weren't supposed to do that. Like, I get that it's hard in the regular season to, you're playing like a base defense and to be very specific about when you're doubling Jokic and then how to rotate around the defense out of that is hard. It's even harder when the Nuggets are kind of a new team, like with CB and Russ, and it's a lot of driving and cutting, and they're still hitting their threes, and teams have been leaving Russ open from three. But he's been hitting them at a decent clip. Even just like Christian Braun, he ran some pick and pop with Jokic, and Jokic was hitting his threes against the Mavs, and CB had a pretty good pass back to Jokic, where Powell just stuck with CB on that drive. And I'm like, why is two people going with Christian on a drive and no one's recovering back to Jokic, and you're letting Jokic hit an open three? Like, that's just a huge mistake.
Because they'd rather live with his three.
Yeah, they're going to have to start adjusting to that. That's the case, which I love. It makes us so much harder to guard. And Jokic's threes have been really keeping us in these games in a lot of ways. Yeah, what did you think about the Mavs game? What was like any of your takeaways?
Well, a lot of my takeaways have to do with how the young players have performed, because a lot of it was like I was either impressed or less than impressed in some instances with how they've been able to created advantages, basically, that that Jokic has given them, whether it's from shooting or driving or dishing. A lot of people have posted the clip of this crazy Jokic, like very water polo-esque pass where he kind of catches on like a semi-short roll from Christian, and then he passes it to a cutting Julian to the rim. It's nice to see just like consistent court awareness, because that's what you need to do to be a good player around Jokic, is just know where to be on the court, and he's going to find you. That was also a great example of something we're going to talk about later, which is how much ball handling in pick and roll that Christian's been doing over, especially the last few games, but even like it was with Jamal out, but also Jamal was there for that Dallas game, and we still had some of these lineups where Christian was at point. So that's something we're going to talk about with him specifically. If you don't have any more thoughts on the Dallas game, I wanted to get to some of the offensive numbers.
I mean, there was the second quarter of that Mavs game where the Mavs went 100% on their free throws, and they made 7 of them, and the Nuggets didn't make any. In the third, we were 12 of 13 on our free throws, and the Mavs were 4 of 7. Jokic went 8 for 8 on free throws in the third quarter, and was just rebounding the hell out of the ball. The Nuggets' free throw rate has always been a point of discussion because it was so terrible last year. We bring in Russ to try and generate more free throws by their aggressiveness on offense.
And that's not just Russ; it's also Christian, because of all these transition opportunities that we're generating by pushing pace, and that he's generating by, being really intentional about pushing pace and being, in position to do these. Matt Moore likes to call them fullback dives. Just like do something with the ball in transition, and often it's getting to the free throw line and he's making them. So that's good.
That was just like the first point I wanted to talk about in relation to the Mavs and the offensive numbers, and whether even that is sustainable, because we talked last episode about stats that through a certain point in the season holds or seems like realistic, that this is what the team is.
Yeah, no, I wanted to talk about the offense a bit, and thanks for teeing that up for me with the free throw rate, because one question that one may have is why the offensive numbers are so good despite missing some of our best offensive players over the past week or so, with Aaron being out and then Jamal being out for that stretch. Malone made this interesting comment, I believe, is after the Heat game, where they are leading the league in points per game from the Heat game back 7. I hate using points per game, so let's get into the pace adjusted numbers. And they're actually still second in adjusted offensive rating. This was true, I believe, in our last show, which was shocking given how bad the overall numbers were. But these are adjusted for how difficult was the defense that you faced. Thankfully, we played like the best defense apparently ever in the Thunder, and then the Clippers are actually pretty good. So those numbers, I was like, this isn't going to hold if the Nuggets keep like shooting like this, all that. They didn't keep shooting like garbage. They are actually shooting 40% as a team from 3 right now, second in the league behind the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are on quite the hot streak of their own. The other thing that's kind of buoying this is the increased pace. Russ is really pushing pace, but even with Russ off the floor, Nuggets are playing at over 100 possession pace per game, which is huge, because as we talked about with Matt Moore last season, they were dead last in pace. And they were 27th in pace, but they had actually gotten slower from the year prior, which doesn't happen Like usually you just get a little bit faster just kind of by accident because the league is just getting faster every year, but they had gotten slower. This year they're way faster. We talked about how pace is one of those statistics, like you mentioned, that you can kind of judge a team on this early in the season. That 101 possessions per game is 7th in the league. They're also 7th in the length of offensive possessions, which I don't know how I feel about that yet, because I think a lot of that is the non-Jokic minutes and some of those ill-advised shots
Yeah.
maybe that the Russ is taking. But there is an emphasis on like getting into stuff early. And we're going to talk more specifically about the cutting off of post-ups and such. But the Nuggets are like leading the league in cuts right now and points off of cuts, which is crazy because it's usually Golden State and they usually have the pace edge as well. But because we're pushing the pace and doing all that stuff, I think that's also, helping things. And the free throw rate is another big part of it, right? One of the things that hasn't looked as smooth is the spread pick and roll game between Jamal and Jokic. And that's not surprising given the spacing. Because Christian's shot, as much as he's making right now, is just, it's not respected like KCP's was. And so there's less room to operate in the middle of the floor. But everything else is more efficient. They happen to be making their shots right now, their 3-point looks. Inside the paint, it's tough. And it's like, I think, again, a product of like the spacing that isn't, the shooting that isn't respected on the perimeter. The paint is so packed, but they're just repeatedly hammering those shots at the rim. Like we're leading the league in rim frequency right now. So they were 4th last year, where 37% of their shots came at the rim in terms of frequency. And this season, they're actually 2nd behind Portland, but it's almost 41%. That's basically a 10% jump relative to how, like, you're taking 10% more shots at the rim this year compared to last. But I think we're still dead last in efficiency. So, like, how do you feel about that?
I mean, the Nuggets offense has always been about getting super efficient paint touches. So, we're just sticking to our game plan. I don't know if it's just because Russ and Pwat were just missing so many layups at the beginning of the season. It was just like brutal. Like I could see that really cratering the efficiency. They've been better lately. I think Russ is always going to be a mixed bag with that. I think Pwat's going to improve with it as time goes on. He's been showing flashes. If he just like stays disciplined on his dunks, not try anything crazy unless it's like obvious that he's going to get a wide open dunk, kind of like he did on that slip versus the Heat.
I will say, though, that even the starters are not super impressive with their rim efficiency. Jokic is shooting less than 65% at the rim. AG, I think, was like 50 something when he left, small sample size and all that. Jamal is the one who's struggling the most. Like, he can't even get into the restricted area anymore with the way that teams are guarding them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm saying, like, that aspect and like Jamal and like, especially in pick and roll, is just looking very much stifled compared to the last 2 years. But all of these other things are making up for it right now. But the shooting, like, I don't expect Christian to keep shooting 50% from 3 the rest of the season, for example, even if he keeps up like a good, efficient percentage.
Yeah. I do think
they're kind of shooting above their heads right now.
Yeah, they are for sure. I think sometimes too the Nuggets are just passing up CB.
Yes, I agree.
Teams aren't guarding him, of course, on the 3, and we're giving it to him, and he's either driving or he's just shooting the 3 and hitting them.
But we're not always giving it to him.
Yeah, like we're not going to it early. Like it's there, and we're running something else, and the paint can be stifled. Sometimes we give it up, or we like wait a little bit too long. If we just start getting it to him more and letting him shoot it, obviously the percentage is going to go down with more attempts for him. But like he's so open right now, and I think Jokic fully trusts him. He's like directing other players like Christian's open, or when he has the ball, he's like Christian's open.
Jokic also looks him off too. He's been looking off a lot more people. But I think part of that is he's trying to be more aggressive. He is looking guys off more. You wouldn't be able to tell because of the assist numbers this year.
Yeah.
But there have been a lot of times in these games where I'm like, okay, Peyton's wide open because Chet does not care about Peyton in the corner. And then Chet is able to like come over and block Jokic's shot. Or, I saw him look off Hunter, like wide open, like no defender within like 10 feet of him. and Jokic is like trying to operate in that like short mid-range area, which is fine because I think he made the shot anyway. Jokic and Jamal have both been doing it. It's just more forgivable when Jokic does it because I actually think he'll be able to make the shot. Jamal needs to be better about getting the ball out to guys when they're open because that paint is just, it's clogged right now.
And his decision making was a little rough at the start of the season, which maybe it was just he was getting used to that dynamic.
Yeah.
I like how they've looked lately, even though the paint is clogged. Like there's ways that they'd been creating space, especially against the Thunder, which we'll talk about. So yeah, with that, with the offense of these players, do you want to get to the plays, the thing, and talk about these slot cuts?
Let's do it.
All right. So as you know, we love Shakespeare around here, and there's a famous quote from Hamlet where he says,
the best one.
Yeah, the play is the thing that catches the soul of the king, catches the king, something like that. Anyway, we're going to go over a concept here or a certain play and just talk about how it's been working in the Nuggets offseason or working in the Nuggets offense this
The offseason
season.
is over, Will. We're in the regular season.
Yeah, saying it so much. So, a key thing has been the slot cuts because spacing is still a concern, I guess you would say, and shooting is something that Calvin Booth is constantly monitoring. We saw this super early on with CB where even if players are leaving him open on offense, he can always cut, or if he gets the ball, drive instead of shoot the three. He's mixing it up a little bit. Sometimes he shoots the open three, sometimes he just drives. And he's been finishing around the rim, and he's been producing on offense, which has been good to see. So let's take a look. I've posted this online on Twitter and on Blue Sky, which you can now follow if you want. Anyway, so like you said, with pace, we've been going to Jokic in the post much more quickly, I think, than normal, which is also helpful. So when he's in the post, you're either going to get a double from off Mike right here where Alex Caruso's doing so. And if Jokic passes it out to Mike, and if Isaiah Joe rotates over to MPJ, he could then theoretically pass it over to Strawther for another shot, which helps to have a spacer in Strawther in this alignment. Mm-hmm. So on this time, Mike obviously just gets the ball and shoots.
Look at Isaiah Joe. He's like, I knew I was supposed to, that was my rotation.
Yeah. He was like, oh, I messed that up. Fuck it. It was a clear, and even Alex Caruso knew that that was what he was supposed to do. So this is the very next play, actually, off of that. And so it's the same thing. Alex Caruso is going to double, but this time Shea's like, oh, I know I have to rotate. That's where he messed up last time. But he's already going before the pass even
Isaiah
gets
Joe's
there.
already in there, too. Like, what's he? He looks like he's about to catch a defensive 3 seconds.
Yeah, he's
Isaiah
in the paint.
Joe.
Yeah, what is he doing there? Maybe, it doesn't even matter because Christian can just cut, and Isaiah Joe being there didn't even do anything. He steps up, I guess, gets contact. There's no foul, but CB finishing through there is pretty impressive.
I thought this was that last one was a good example of Christian's timing, but this one will be also.
Yeah, this one was interesting because Jokic bobbled the entry pass. He's already doubled, pretty much right off the get-go. He's right under the basket. You would think, Peyton cutting right into that wouldn't be good. It's like bringing another defender there.
It wasn't, actually. This was a really, messy example of the same thing.
Yeah, it's...
Because Jokic bobbled the entry pass, I think Peyton's, ready just off of if this was a clean possession. So he just runs for the timing without accounting for that kind of messiness on the post entry.
If he stayed with Strawther, there could be a potential dump off pass to Pwat there that Jokic could do, and he could maybe score around the rim. But luckily, I don't even think Jokic knew Pwat was cutting because he just immediately turned to look at the weak side. And luckily, Peyton was cutting at the same time and took that defender, and then Strawther gets an open three. So that worked out really well.
That's a good example of what I was talking about earlier with having some roll gravity off ball. Or I guess all rolls are off ball where Peyton's able to take a defender with him and open things up outside, just like AG does.
So a little more coordinated one, of course. It's the same theory. Obviously, if Jokic is doubled and Russ is on the perimeter, someone's probably going to go close out to or rotate to Strawther. He's the shooter. But Russ is just the decision making even on this cut, and Jokic being in lockstep with it. The action happens super quick. It's a really easy read.
And then Russ. He doesn't. I was gonna say Russ finishing it, but then Jokic finishes it.
Jokic cleans it up, which is another benefit of playing out of the post if Jokic is already down there to get an offensive rebound.
Christian cuts. Isaiah Joe picks him up a lot higher than the last time.
Yeah. So both Shea and Isaiah Joe rotate to Strawther. And then...
Oh, and then he's really patient here. I forgot about this possession. This was good.
Yeah, Julian has kind of been doing this, which I don't know if it's good or not. Maybe the patience is good. Sometimes it's not, but...
Oh, no, that he was... Because Shea's going to block this if he tries to shoot it. I know Julian has he's got a good release and like all that, like quick release, but Shea has blocked lots of... Because that's the thing with the Thunder is they have such good closeouts.
Mm-hmm.
But he waits and then just is like, oh, Christian's wide open under the rim and gets it to him on time, on target. Like right on time to get
close.
that layup before Chet was able to.
I think when I saw that live, I thought it was going to be a turnover with Dort. Thankfully, that was a quick pass. And yeah, just like Jokic being in the post and being able to pop out to the perimeter can open up stuff on the weak side and, just cutting through slots, especially if teams are playing off shooters. So it's like you can create space, obviously, without just needing to shoot threes. And the Nuggets have been doing that with these guys, which I think plays into the strength of the roster and these Project Dynasty Booth boys that we've been talking about. So
yeah, I actually had in my notes here wondering how Jamal's return changes the geometry of this. But the more I think about it, I'm like, oh, it's just gonna be Jamal instead of Julian or someone out there.
Yeah.
But how does AG's return change the geometry of this? Is it just like AG instead of Peyton, and like both of them are equally ignored from the from that weak side corner?
I think AG would probably be weak side corner and could maybe, if like people were really good about like staying home or guarding, rotating out of it, maybe he could baseline cut dunker spot and Jokic could get him from the post.
Like he does.
Something like that, probably.
Which I miss. I miss AG dunks.
Yeah, I know. All right, so before we talk specifically about the Project Dynasty players, let's look at the Nuggets' next 10 games. You want to go through and predict their record. So Pelicans are super injured right now. That's going to be a NBA Cup game. I'm going to say that's a W, right?
Okay, so for me, I agree. The Pelicans are very injured, and we should win that game. If they lose that game, I will be very mad, on the road or not.
So Memphis, we play them 2 times. Is this a back-to-back in Memphis?
Yes.
I'm going to say we lose the first and win the next one.
I actually agree with you. They're going to win one, lose the other, but I think they're going to win the first one and lose the second.
Okay, yeah.
Dallas, I think they're going to win because they're at home. Even with Lively back, I think they'll have figured some things out. We'll see. That's also the NBA Cup game.
I'll say we lose that. Then at the Lakers, they're playing pretty good. Actually, they've kind of fallen a bit.
They're mid, man. Like they're mid again.
I'm gonna say W.
I actually think the Lakers might be an L. So I put an L there just because they don't have AG. They're going to be a lot more reliant on Peyton Watson to guard LeBron. Mm-hmm. And I haven't watched the Nuggets play a game where they didn't have AG to guard LeBron. So I'm incredibly worried about that. W against the Knicks.
What if CB guards LeBron and Peyton guards AD?
I mean, Jokic. Who's Jokic guarding?
Oh, Rui. I don't know.
Who's MPJ guarding?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. We'll see. Knicks. Ooh, that's at home. That's a win.
Yeah. So Knicks, I'm going to give them a W. Like, take care of business at home. They're a really bad defensive team right now, and apparently the Nuggets are fine when they can score whatever.
Then we have the Jazz away. We're finally going to exercise some demons, win.
They did that last season. They won a Jazz game in Utah, yeah.
Okay, so
it was the day before game 80 against the Wolves.
We've broken the curse, so we're going to continue on.
Utah W, again, like, I think they should just be taking care of that Jazz team. That Jazz team is so bad right now, like, way worse than even I thought.
The Clippers, we're going to get our revenge on them.
Clippers, I think W, like, they got to get that one back because they should have won that game at home.
Ooh, we're going to beat the Warriors.
I'm going to give them an L because I just think that Steph Curry is going to have his way with our team without KCP right now. And I'm going to give them an L for Cleveland, not just because Cleveland's playing so well, but I don't know if AG is going to be back by then. In fact, I would bet against it just in terms of being cautious. And Evan Mobley's been playing like an all-star. So without AG to guard him, it's just like, that's wraps. In addition to being on the road versus Cleveland, like, that's not a team that they've ever taken seriously on the road, unfortunately. So Yeah, I think they're going to get smacked in that game, actually.
All right. Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. We lost to
Also,
them
we have no
last
one for
year,
Darius
at least
Garland.
once, I think, on the
So,
road. So I'm going to say a loss.
okay. So
So
another 7-3.
7-3. Okay. When it comes to Project Dynasty, we know that the Booth Boys have to really step it up and be a contributor to get the Nuggets back to fully contending status. I think, with AG being out and us playing Zeke and Hunter and all that, there was like a funny picture of like all the players that played in the game outside of Russ were like drafted by the Nuggets, which is pretty hilarious to think about when you think about other teams and how.
I mean, that's just true for any game that AG didn't play in.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about Project Dynasty and where we are in terms of getting back to contending status. Let's just talk a little bit about Julian and how you're feeling on him.
So for Julian specifically, I actually think he's been a lot shakier offensively than I would have wanted to see versus the staunch defenses that they played in the last, again, it's only a 3-game sample size, but he's gotten a bit freaked out by length on defense. He's been throwing up some wild floaters, and he hasn't been making as many of his threes either. So just over the 3 games where they played the Thunder, the Heat, and the Mavs, he's shooting 35% from the fields and 20% from 3. Right? It was really impressive and good to see him start off the season like super efficient from the field. He's not even taking like a ton of threes. I think he's even right now only taking 5 attempts per game. But he was getting good looks and he's just not making them. And then once he's inside the arc, I think he's panicking a little bit too much versus these tough defenses. And one of the things that I, said, it was either our last episode or the one before that, where we talked about like, where do these guys need to be by the end of the year to be known playoff contributors? And we need Julian to be a playoff contributor, assuming the roster stays the same by the time the playoffs come around, is that he needs to be around the level of comfort and like trustworthiness offensively as Aaron Wiggins. And that's not what I've seen from him versus these really good defenses, unfortunately. The good thing is like his spacing seems to be relatively respected when he is coming off of these pin downs. Like guys are chasing over, like he's getting that coverage, and so he's able to still be a positive on the floor, similar to like when MPJ's having a bad shooting night, he's still a positive just because of the spacing that he provides by virtue of that gravity. But that might change if teams start figuring out that he isn't consistently efficient. And so that is definitely something that has concerned me.
Honestly, a lot of the success we've had with Julian in these lineups is just the fact that the defense thinks he's like a deadly 3-point shooter, and that's what he's supposed to be. They could probably get away with it more if they just let him shoot a little bit. Although his open threes, I'd love to see the stats on that because I feel like
all his threes are open, honestly.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. He's just inconsistent across the board, right? I'm still super hopeful on him. He's a second-year player. CB and Pwat are in the third years. He's on both sides. Like he has speed on defense, but he is like super unstable in a closeout or just not knowing how to balance his body just to stay positionally sound on defense, whether it's like no matter where he is on the court. Similarly, like with the control in the paint when he's going for a floater or whatever, it's just a little bit chaotic. But he had an amazing play at the end of that Raptors game that he drove and had a layup off the glass through some contact, and that was a go-ahead bucket. So that was like a high-pressure moment. That was cool to see. But yeah, he's just got to keep showing that he can be in a rotation. We may just have to play him in a rotation in the playoffs because we're already so shallow, and he is someone who can theoretically.
Well, right now we do have to, and he has to be good enough to do that because we don't have anybody else on the perimeter. Like our guard core is really like not good right now. So that's definitely a concern. I don't know if he's going to be ready to contribute offense versus playoff level defenses. I'm leaning towards no right now, just in terms of caution. Like he's a second-year player, right? Like there's no reason to have that expectation set on him. I'm curious with respect to his bench production specifically. Do you think the fact that Dario isn't playing is contributing at all to the gap between Julian's recent play and how he looked, say, in the preseason? Because even when the regular season started, Dario was playing, not playing well. It's not like those guys were playing off of each other, and Julian hasn't been as much a focal point of the bench offense since the preseason. And I find that interesting because he was very much the focal point of the bench offense in the preseason.
Yeah, so much of the messaging was that Dario would work really well with Strawther in a way where he would be doing handoffs or be, getting him the ball because he's a passer and creating open looks for him. I think once we kind of got him out of the bench unit and Russ just took over that responsibility of like trying to get people open threes by driving chaotically or whatever the hell and just using his passing skills, maybe just there's more clarity in the scheme. But I could be wrong about that.
I think that Russ needs to look for Julian more.
Yeah,
I think he needs to look for both Julian and MPJ more, frankly, in those minutes. One of the things that people have pointed out that's like part of the reason that like he and Dario didn't necessarily work like once the regular season started. One, Dario wasn't able to make layups, or at least in that 5-game stretch, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that Russ isn't great at like, I thought he'd be better at kicking out to 3 on those drives, but he's really good with a rolling big, and he's trying to find that interior pass. He's trying to find a cutter, but he's not necessarily looking to kick out on a shooter. And I think so many more of the possessions have been Russ driving rather than like a methodical, like, oh, he's a hub and he's looking to like, pass to Julian, who's coming off on some weak side action or something. That's what we saw more in the preseason, even when Dario wasn't the hub. Like it was Russ as the hub and Dario screening, whatever, to kind of complete that action that they're trying to run on a given play. But ever since the season started, it's a lot of like Russ in transition, getting downhill, in the half court, even like he's trying to get into things quickly, like run a pick and roll and then find the big or find a cutter, not so much either methodically or in a drive and kick scenario looking for a shooter. So we've already talked about like Julian being inefficient, but I also just think he's not getting enough looks, and maybe that's part of it.
I wonder if Russ just needs to know ahead of time when he's driving that that's what he's going to do, whereas sometimes he's driving.
Yeah,
and he's like, I'm either going to try to go back to the big or to a pick and
Russ
pop.
is not going in there with a plan, Will.
Yeah. Well, there are times where he kicked out to Jamal or someone where I feel like he just knew that was almost what he was going to do, and therefore it was like easier for him to accomplish it. Whereas if he's trying to improvise and he's trying to pull the ball up and like he's already in the air and he's trying to get it out to a shooter and people are already swarming it and it ends up being a turnover or whatever. Let's go to Peyton Watson though, because his 3 has been there more than it was at the beginning of the season, which is going to be important for him. That was the message to him before the season. It's part of the Nuggets' overall strategy to get more threes. He has to be a 3-and-D role player at this point. That's just by necessity and style of the pace and space era. Mm-hmm. There's some interesting stats on him and just the fact that he made just huge plays to win games for us, whether there was a block on Kyrie or Shea on a final possession to win the game. What have been your Pwat impressions? And we'll look at some clips here.
So the thing that's obviously impressed me the most about the last 5 games for him is just his defensive progression. Like that was the thing that worried me the most to start the season. Like we already know he's kind of a raw offensive player, and even if he's improved in some ways, like it's going to take a while for those to come along in game. But I was really worried with him coming off with the hamstring, how he looked to start the season defensively, because he was just not impacting anything. Throw all that out the window over the last, I would say 4.5 games. Like I said, that second half of that Raptors game. So I guess that's 3.5 games, whatever. He's been sensational on defense again, just like he was last year. In the OKC game, if you could pull up the clips of Pwat on Chet. So they put him on Chet so that he could switch these actions. Go ahead. And then he's able to recover, and he and MPJ sort of collectively get the block here. And there were also possessions where this is the same one.
Yeah. Okay. What was the other one?
The other one is when he's stonewalling. Okay, so he's on Chet in the second half of this game, and he's able to stonewall Chet. And I think that was so essential to the Nuggets comeback in that game. One of the things I forgot to mention earlier is how impressive it was, and just how good it was to see the Nuggets look impressive again. And the part of the formula that was missing up until that point was the defense. We hadn't seen them go on those like 9-0, 10-0, 12-0 runs like they did last year, even in like the starters minutes. Like they have this like great net rating, but they're like really chipping away at things. And it's a lot of like, we're kind of outscoring you, we're outgunning you, but it's not as much like those, we're stifling you on defense and then immediately scoring on the other end. That hasn't been happening. That run in the third quarter of the game versus OKC was due in large part to Peyton's defense on Chet. And that was just one aspect of his defensive versatility. We talked a bit about Malone playing him at the 5 in the Miami Heat game. Now, we talked about it offensively. And there were some minutes in that stretch where they were like, let's put Russ on Bam or whatever it is. But Peyton guarded Bam some as well, if you could bring up that clip too. So he is obviously giving up a lot of ground to Bam here, but he doesn't just get bowled over in this possession and then he and MPJ are collectively able to force that turnover. It gave the Nuggets the option of going to that in a spurt. And that has been, you talked about just like, what is the ceiling of his defensive versatility? I don't know. And I like that I don't know. And I like the fact that just this stretch of the last 5 games has, completely flipped my, my perception of that from a pretty negative, outlook on that end of the floor. In the Dallas game, Malone talked about in the post game, like, yeah, the reason Peyton played 40 minutes today and Hunter was out of the lineup is because he wanted to match Peyton's minutes with Luka. Now, I don't think Peyton was actually effective on Luka like the whole night. I think Luka was just having a bad night, and we know Luka kind of bullies guys of his like archetype, the Jaden McDaniels types, pretty easily. And he did a couple times in that game. But whenever Peyton was put on Kyrie, I thought he was actually quite effective. His length gives him, he's not the best screen navigator. He might be the best screen navigator on this team, though, which is a problem. But his length gives him so much margin for error when recovering around screens. If you go to that game-winning block that he had over Kyrie, he's actually recovering off of a screen here, because Kyrie comes off a screen and pulls up from 3, and Peyton is able to come off of it and recover to block his 3-point shot. I thought he did the best one-on-one job on Kyrie too. We talked about like he doesn't have the most like sound defensive like fundamentals in terms of footwork, but he has so much margin for error with his length. I actually want you to show the clip of a tough shot that Kyrie made, because I want you to watch Peyton's defense on this possession and ask if there was literally anything better that he could have done here.
This bank shot was insane.
Like, that was ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
and
that was really good defense.
That was excellent defense, and he was the only one that could like stay in front of Kyrie. And the reason for that is not because of the quickness or anything like that, but because he had more margin for error in his recovery. And he also stayed like pretty sound, like he wasn't biting on fakes or anything on that possession, which was good, right? That's the other thing I've talked about with Peyton, is how much he learns over the course of, sometimes it's like one game to the next game. Like last year, I think I talked about this earlier on an earlier episode, where he gets completely like cooked by DeRozan, biting on every fake in the first time they play the Bulls. The next time they play the Bulls, he's playing like perfect defense on him. But we got to see him kind of grow in his feel for the scouting report just over the course of the game on a player that wasn't even his primary assignment and who had been cooking the Nuggets the entire game in Kyrie Irving. So of all the things that I want to temper expectations about, Peyton's defense is not one of them, because I've been beyond impressed with his performance the last few games.
Yeah, and it's beautiful to see him be deployed, whether at the center or guarding someone as fast and twitchy or skilled as Kyrie. That's what Malone mentioned before the season, is that Peyton has versatility and can be deployed on a matchup basis on different players night to night to night. That's something that like AG does. Now Pwat's filling in for AG and kind of doing that. It's good to see the pep in his step, so to say, back in like the
We've seen him
athleticism.
guard Kyrie Irving, RJ Barrett, Chet Holmgren, Bam Adebayo, Luka Doncic, less effectively than the first three.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just in terms of that versatility. And then, we can't really get out of this conversation without talking about his help defense on his game-saving block in the OKC game. So this was really impressive because if you play the clip, Pwat missed what would have been game-sealing free throws, although against this Thunder, you never know. And then we got Russ on the floor. He gets blown by. Peyton comes in, and he just, again, barely grazes the ball with the tip of, I think, his middle finger.
Mm-hmm.
But he gets up there to block the shot. And we're going to get to see, the slow-mo of this coming up here. Okay, this is insane. Look at this. And that could have been, I don't even know if that was going to be like a little scoop shot. That could have been a fake that turned into a lob for Chet at that point because he sees Peyton rotating over. Mm-hmm. But he gets the ball, so it doesn't matter, and we don't have to find out. He also gets the rebound there, if you see. Yeah. And this is all right after he misses 2 would-be game-sealing free throws. So I've been beyond impressed with Peyton defensively over this stretch. I can't say enough good things about Peyton's defense, which I didn't have any good things to say about Peyton's defense in the first 5 games.
I know, that was the big concern, is people were like, Peyton Watson is not going to fit on this team. We need to trade him. Like, he was just one of the biggest disappointing pieces to start out the year. And the defense was the thing we thought was a known with him, and we were questioning it, but it's back. It's evident. You can see it. The help defense, on ball, navigating screens, whatever. I mean, obviously, he can still improve. Like, he has got to get reps, and it's going to be instinctual, natural for him the more it goes on. But just the raw athleticism still there, and I'm happy to see that. The offense is the thing that he needs to keep improving on for sure.
Yes.
We're seeing it here and there, of course, like rim finishing. We're seeing it. It's not a complete 0. The 3-point, we're seeing it. It's not a complete 0. It's
not a complete 0, but it could stand to be better.
Yeah, not a complete 0. That's something. His defensive production is something that's always going to be there. And question,
I'm glad to see that again, because we didn't know that after the first few games.
Is that making up for the continued offensive limitations? And how have you seen his offensive game growing?
I think in the regular season, especially with AG out, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that dynamic, Peyton's defense can make up for a lot, especially because of how he can play within the flow of the Nuggets offense, right? He's been making his threes the last few games, and that has certainly helped, right? But sometimes they've got him playing the dunker spot. Haven't seen him as much as a cutter this season. I actually can't recall a possession where he is scoring as a cutter from this season, but we saw that a lot more last year. So maybe that's another thing that we might see at some point this year, because even without the scoring aspect, like, he might have a little bit more roll gravity in that, kind of like how like AG cuts and like a bunch of guys go with him and it opens up things on the outside. But, comparing his role again to, what AG normally does for this team, I actually thought that a member of Nuggets Twitter, Calvin Booth, had a really good point about Peyton's offense. So he's doing a good job of filling in the cracks while AG is away, but he hasn't shown enough to assuage the concerns about that offensive fit when AG is back. So playing that small forward role. He talked about this in the preseason, how he's looking forward to doing more small forward stuff, and especially on this team that requires being able to operate more on the perimeter. we've seen little flashes again. And we saw flashes of it last year, but it wasn't consistent, right? He was able to hit that elbow midi when he was, playing the 5 in the backup minutes. So that is like, okay, he can do something on the perimeter there. He's been hitting some of his threes. We're gonna expect that to be streaky, especially because the shot form is not, trustworthy, let's say. But keep hitting them, kid. Like that is always helpful. If you could play the clip of this bailout floater that he had in the game versus the Raptors. I don't know if you remember watching this possession in person, but I was really worried. This was a game where Julian was struggling with on-ball pressure. He wasn't able to get anything on Shed. And so he kind of tosses the grenade to Peyton, and he's able to create just this bailout floater out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, that went in. Okay. He's gone to that floater a few times this season. And I've kind of been wondering, like, what is this kid doing? Because it wasn't falling necessarily. But again, a great bailout shot. He's not going to it as like the thing that he's trying to create, especially because he's not getting as many perimeter creation reps. In spot up situations, he's usually just catch and shoot for the most part. Like that was an example of where he slashed and was able to create that shot off the dribble. I'd like to see more of that in order to assuage some of my concerns, almost more than the 3-point shot, because it would give us more options in terms of what he can do on the ball, frankly.
Yeah.
And that would, like, I've talked a lot about, like, what is it that the Nuggets need from all of these guys to fill in the cracks that we have with our on-ball creation. But what did you think about that sort of comparison, like how he fits, like maybe perfectly right now while AG is out, but not necessarily showing enough for when AG's back?
Yeah, because it's going to change his position. I think, he's having success at the 4. I think ideally he could be most like deadly as
Jokic,
yeah,
to be clear.
That's true. I think he could be most deadly as like a 3 who can do more things on the perimeter and slash. And if he can get a floater, it'd be amazing. I think he has decent touch. I think he got an offensive rebound and it was just no one was coming after him. And he just kind of like outstretched his long arm and just kind of put it in on one.
I would like to see that touch be applied to making more of his layups.
Yeah, exactly.
I believe last season he shot like 43% in the paint non-restricted area, which was among the best on the team. Obviously, Jokic is at like 60-something% on all those floaters, right? But like he was really good in that like push shot sort of range last year. And I'm curious if that, is sustainable and if it could continue.
Yeah. I think last season, a lot of what I was looking at was how he was modeling his game after AG, just playing in the dunker spot. He was hitting some threes, but it wasn't like a huge emphasis for him as much as this year because the shooting is like a need. I don't know if it's just because that's the messaging to him that he's spotting up. And I don't know how much we're going to see as far as getting to certain spots and what it is that he's utilizing on the offensive end this season. But the more that he can incorporate and get comfortable with when AG's back, the better. So,
yeah, no, I agree. And actually, speaking of shooting, we should probably talk about Nikola Jokic just really quick and how he fits into how these young guys are developing right now.
I mean, he's been taking more threes. Obviously, at a game where he hit 7 threes, the 3-point shot's back. It's something we had been debating all offseason. We're happy to see it.
Sure did. I lost that debate.
I don't know. I think you still have a case. Like, because it's like, yeah, Jokic is always going to be he's the best player in the league. He's going to be deadly inside the perimeter and in the post. When he has his 3 going, it just makes it that much more difficult. It's almost unfair. It's ridiculous. So do you think he's been deliberately taking more threes because of the shooting concerns?
I absolutely do think that his 3-point attempts are up by 1 full per game, which is like a 30% increase basically from last year, from 2.9 attempts to 3.9 attempts per game. Part of that is pace, but if you just kind of weigh everything out, this year, that's 21% of his shots coming from 3 compared to 16% of his shots last year. And I said I lost the debate about the importance of Jokic's 3-point shot. I'm going to declare that I lost that debate, and here's why. Because on this roster, the spacing is not the same. We talked about how the lack of respected 3-point shooters, like guys are making the shots that they're getting. Like that is just true. I'm not taking away from that. But teams are not guarding them the way that they were, like the duo of KCP and MPJ. That's just a fact, right? And we talked about how it was impacting Jamal, but I think Jokic is also starting to experience it as well. His shooting around the rim is down this year again, and the floater is not looking as good either. And I can't help but wonder if that's because of a more packed paint. You know, we talked about it last year. He was well over 60% in that floater range. And this year so far, he's at 53 on his floaters. So he did go through a mini slump with the floater last season, but it was like in December, like it was weird and whatever. I didn't really see any other reason for it than a slump. Maybe that's what this is, but I do think that having more space to operate makes that floater more comfortable, and he doesn't have that this year. But the fact that he's taking more threes and that he's making them opens up so much more for all these other guys, right? Now, Jokic is hitting Christian, for example, a lot more on cuts from the post. But I can't help but think about all the times in the last 5 games where he's out of the 3-point line and teams are closing out on him and he's able to pump fake and drive. Like, I think it's dumb because I'm like, you guys better live with that 3 because if he gets into that paint, you're cooked.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the teams were going to keep, letting him shoot that shot, but it turns out teams don't like it when a guy keeps hitting wide open threes on them, and they're going to close out whether the scouting report says to or not. And there are many times especially the first 5 games, because the shooting of the rest of the team was just abysmal. It was really just Jokic and AG carrying while MPJ was still finding his shot and all of that too. He was just deciding that Clippers game was a great example because the Clippers were packing the paint so much they couldn't get anything inside, and everything they tried was resulting in a turnover. So Jokic just started popping a ton more. He's like, this is what we're getting. And it wasn't just to get his own shot, but with him popping, it opened up more space on the inside for the other guys to get to their shots, Jamal, AG, etc. And so that's the thing. The reason that we're talking about this in the Project Dynasty section is because it's been essential to providing the opportunity for these young guys to operate on the interior, frankly, because even Julian, like you think about him as he's already a respected shooter on this team more so than like Peyton and Christian, even though they're actually shooting better from 3 right now. But reputation is everything. But he's able to cut and drive and all of that whenever Jokic is popping on the floor as well. I think it's just important because it adds to the argument of why Jokic is the best player in the world and that he can play with anybody and play any style. And it's easy to say now that he's like making his shots. Obviously, I was hedging this summer when I said he doesn't need the 3-point shot to be the best in the world. But yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Also, part of the reason was that Christian Braun's 3, while not being fully respected right now, was a shot that many were skeptical of, despite any percentages. And it's still holding steady. He hasn't gone in a slump yet. So let's talk about Christian Braun, because his offense has been the talk of the town, even more than his defense, which we know CB has proven to be a good defender through multiple seasons. Not necessarily something we're wondering about. Now we're wondering about how sustainable his offense is and how he's operating within the offense. So how do you feel about CB as an offensive player? And has he been better on offense this year than defense? And if so, would that concern you?
So you just said that the defense is not something that we have a question about because he's been a good defensive player the last couple of years. I would have agreed like 10 games ago, but it's not that Christian's been a bad defender, but he's definitely struggled in particular matchups. I do think that he's been a better offensive player than defensive player over the first 10 games. and even particularly over the last 5, because while he has been able to thrive in certain matchups, I thought he did a great job on Cam Thomas on the Nets, but he was getting absolutely cooked by Dennis Schroeder. I thought he did a good job on RJ Barrett, but he was getting cooked by Grady Dick, especially off ball. There was an interesting thing that happened in the second half of that Toronto game where you're wondering, like, why isn't Grady Dick more involved? And you're like, oh, is it like ball denial from Christian? Like, whatever. Whenever they were in the second half, they were just trying to run isolations for Grady Dick on Christian instead of what they were doing in the first half, which is running him off of screens.
Yeah.
And that was like the easiest way to shed him. So I thought that the Raptors just made a tactical error in that respect. And even, sorry, a matchup that he thrived in last year versus Anthony Edwards, Ant was cooking him off of screens in that Minnesota game. I think we talked about this on the last show, all of the open threes that the Nuggets gave up throughout that game, but again, in the clutch, were on miscommunications. But part of the reason for those miscommunications is they have to do all this switching because Christian is struggling to get around these screens and fight over them. We talked about the Kyrie matchup and how Peyton did a better job because he has more like margin for error on recovery. But Christian was getting just barbecued in that matchup in the first half. And we talked about that tough shot that Kyrie hit over Peyton. That's not what was happening when Christian was the primary defender. It's mostly just like Kyrie being able to very easily shed Christian off on a screen and then just getting this open look. And it was the same again with Tyler Hero and the Heat.
Oh God, we didn't even talk about that. Just real quick, Tyler Hero was just getting downhill so easily, just free layups. It was kind of crazy to see, but
free layups. And he was actually getting downhill. He's been a much better player this year. I feel like he should be a most improved candidate because his shot selection is great, his playmaking is great, but the Heat suck right now. It's not his fault. Like the silver lining here is that almost once per game in this stretch, I swear it's happened like every game, I've seen him get scored on in a way where I'm like, Christian, like you got to block that. You got to stop that guy, whatever. And then go down on the other end of the floor and end up with a wide open 3 off of whatever action is happening and then cashing it on these above the break threes. So that's what kind of spurred this question of like, has he been a better offensive player than defensive player? He's shooting 42% on his wide open threes. He's shooting 57% on his above the break threes right now. Like all of them. There's still a giant discrepancy with the corner 3-point shooting, which I find to be hilarious. Like very Bruce Brown, where he's shooting 17% in the right corner and then 38% in the left corner. I'm going to go with this isn't good. I don't trust the shooting to continue at this rate. And that's the thing is like they've needed the shooting to be at this rate to win these games because they've been so close. And I think that he needs to reclaim I am the best perimeter defender on this team because he's going to be at the point of attack of the best guys most of the time. That's going to require him to have a bit better just technique when it comes to like fighting over these screens so that he's not giving up as many switches because that's a big part of it too. One of the things I actually want to talk about related to this is actually Adam Morris from DNVR went on Kevin O'Connor's show. I think it was yesterday. And he was talking about how the Nuggets had some quote internal metrics that he was privy to somehow. I'm sure he has his sources that showed that KCP ranked low on some of these internal metrics on various aspects of like getting really physical, whether it was like, I don't know, whether it was like boxing out guys or like doing more things in the paint, ground coverage, and like doing lots of stuff. He always ranked really low on these internal metrics, which I was pretty shocked to hear because I feel like KCP and how often he was fighting over screens, both on and off the ball to stay attached to his guy who was more often than not the best perimeter player on the opposing team and constantly getting like hit in the face, drawing these offensive foul calls on these screens. Like Christian's not getting those calls because he's not able to fight over the screens like that. Getting hit in the face because he's not giving these players any airspace. It's shocking to me that would appear in these internal metrics. And really, I think it's interesting. Like we've talked, we had our whole like media story last week already, right? About like the front office trying to do a cleanup job on their reputation after a really rough, I think objectively rough off season. And one of the bigger parts of that was losing KCP, right? But I also don't think that anything those internal metrics said would have made them keep KCP. Like regardless of what they said, like we saw the number that they let him walk for. So I just think it's kind of like strange that like this is out there now. It also just doesn't seem to match up with the reality of everything KCP did defensively. Now, Mike Malone, he's been very outward about not wanting us to compare Christian and KCP. The point that I want to make is how much the Nuggets defense is suffering as a result of Christian not being able to have the same defensive impact as KCP. Now, he could do it in another way. Let's say he never becomes a better screen navigator, whatever. He has to make sure he locks down these guys at least in isolation. Like you can't be getting cooked off the dribble by Tyler Hero. You have to lock up Dennis Schroeder if he's rejecting a screen even, right? You can't fight over a screen, whatever. Like get under it, like you figure out a way, right? There are other things that the Christian can do to weaponize his own tools. And we've already talked about in some of these matchups, Cam Thomas, SGA. I think he's been by far the best defender on SGA on this team. And he's been much better in that matchup than even I thought he would be in the 2 games that they played versus OKC. Actually wonder why they went to Russ on him in that last possession, but it was just like, whatever. Maybe to make Russ feel good. But that's just something I really want to highlight because I think that the defense was such a big part of what gave the Nuggets a margin for error to win 57 games last season. Even when the offense was sputtering at different points last year.
It is surprising to hear, based on the way that KCP fights through screens. I think CB, I don't actually know how much like their height comparisons, but he just
KCP was like a solid 6'5", and Christian is like a solid 6'7".
Yeah, I just think CB's so much bigger, and it's just so much harder, as we know, for bigger players to navigate through screens. I think KCP, he's like, even if he's smaller, he's skinnier. CB has some muscle. It's hard to get through stuff like that. That's why CB's better at guarding like an Ant versus KCP, but not as good as guarding a Schroeder or a Tyler Hero or Grady Dick. I totally get your concern. It's valid. I'm excited about CB's offense, and I would rather it be at this. Obviously, everyone wants his 3 to be this good. I agree that it's definitely not going to be sustainable. It's going to go down. I hope it's not like a horrible slump, and this was just like a super hot streak, never to be seen again. I'm waiting for to get through a whole season so I can anoint CB as the certified 3-point shooter. So I'm impatient for that. I also think
well, he had a good 3-point shooting season last year too.
Yeah.
He's just not hesitating now and still making them, which is really nice.
And he wasn't a starter last year, so it's just, I don't know if it's just the different role and emphasizing his shot, and just he's working on his offensive game. I bet way more than defense. I bet him and the team are almost taking his defense for granted a little bit, and just like, do what you do, but like, this is what you got to do on offense. And maybe that's where his focus is.
And we saw that at the beginning of last year too, where even off the bench, they had him taking on more of that like point guard role. And he was looking rough defensively to start last season too. And then in the second half, he totally locked in. And then he was like, all right, this is the guy. So, that's a really good point to make just on those defensive numbers. We're actually 27th in half court defense this season, which is atrocious. We were 5th last year, but in the title year, they were not good. Through 10 games, they were 21st in half court defense, which is not 27th, but it's still not good. And then they ended up finishing 15th overall. So maybe this season's going to look like that. And again, that title year they had KCP. Anyway, it's not like this automatic thing. Like a lot of it is communication and chemistry and all of this other stuff. But that's like the one thing that's really keeping me, because I can have all the questions that I have about Peyton's offense, about Julian's offense, about whether Christian's shooting is going to keep up. But if I thought that the defense was going to look anywhere near what it looked like last year, I would feel a lot more comfortable about where I want the Nuggets to be in the title contention race than they do, because I think Jokic is playing at this just unbelievable level offensively that if they could figure the defense out, I actually do think they could figure the offense out enough. But I'm not. But I already know that this offense is unsustainable because of these shooting numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm like, this defense like really needs to catch up soon.
I think the key thing for CB will be a message that's similar to what Malone has always told Mike, who is known as a offensive player and less a defensive, is that if your shot's not falling, you're not contributing on offense. Really focus on contributing in other ways, whether that's just back to the basics of rebounding and playing hard defense and rotating and help side defense, which I feel like Mike has done.
It's not like mistakes, though, except for like the communication stuff on screens. Right. It's not like when Mike, like he'll get into his shooting slumps and then he starts like not rotating on time. Like that's not really the kind of stuff that we're seeing. That's like the issue with Christian. It's like, oh, this is like a big fundamental difference in the way that he's a good defender versus what we had before. And it's like taking time to adapt. Like we've had to adapt the defense of the team defense entirely because of that, right? Like we talked about how they're doing more switching now.
I think the basic like principles of the defense are still there, where it's like at the level, hedging on screens or blitzing, and then the, low man rotating and like help side defense and all that jazz. I mean, maybe it's not as consistent and maybe CB is still getting used to that. I guess it's just I have full faith still in CB's ability. I just think he's focused on other things. I could be wrong. Like maybe he's taken a step back. Maybe he's just never going to be good at guarding quick guards. We'll see where he improves. Maybe just through time and reps of navigating screens he'll improve. Maybe navigating screens with Jokic more specifically, because KCP and him were like in lockstep. It was like instinctual. Maybe that's still growing. I don't know. I guess it's just I'm thinking when and if, hopefully if CB's shot doesn't fall, he's gonna have to realize that the way that he's gonna impact the game and help win is to be super aggressive and putting effort on defense. If it's not a matter of him not giving effort and he's just like taking a step back, then that sucks. But if it is a matter of like just putting your focus there and really trying in that sense, then
I doubt it's an effort thing. Like it doesn't look like an effort thing to me is the thing.
The only reason I say that is because when I was at the Raptors game, which was another point I wanted to bring up, was the defense was trash and we didn't
hot dumpster fire.
We didn't put up like I could noticeably see, just being in there in person, like the intensity rise up at the end. And I do think the Nuggets are coasting a little bit. And then when it's like, they're the clutch merchants like last season, I think that they like raise their defensive intensity up when it's like they know they have to win the game and they just have to get a couple stops and then score on the offensive side. And I'm just like waiting for harder, tougher matchups, or when the playoffs come, to see full and defensive intensity across the whole game, which I am skeptical of, because the Nuggets, we haven't seen them put like together a really complete game in quite a while. Like we only saw a couple of those even last season. And we're not going to get to the top 3 defense that Malone was saying that he wants. So I just think when we need to put the effort on defense, we can. It's just, I think we're slacking a little bit right now.
That's good insight, because I can't see things, up close and all that. We know that these freaking clutch merchants, they really like to lock in at the ends of games. But the problem with that is that you end up making a lot more games like 50-50 or closer to 50-50 than they should be. Like both of those Raptors games that came down to missed pull-up threes from RJ Barrett. It's like really bailed out because they were both like not great looks. Like the second one, the one where Russ was contesting, was not a great look, but that was the one that was in and out too. So, the basketball gods are cutting them some slack right now, but I think they need to not burn it. Let's talk just a little bit about some of the things that CB has been focused more on than the defense, because I've actually been really impressed with his ability to run empty side pick and roll with Jokic. If you could bring up the clip where he's actually able to score, because it's versus a defensive coverage that you and I talked about during the Wolves series. So he's throwing the ball into Jokic here, and he's going to come off the DHO. Bam is going to try to recover back to Jokic and like ignore him completely. And part of that's because of a little, you'll see Christian do a little hesitation here, but he keeps his dribble alive, and then he's able to get the dunk.
Yeah.
As Duncan is chasing him over this screen for some reason, I think you should obviously go under the screen for Christian. That's just like what you should do. But it's more difficult when he's running into the DHOs like this, right?
Yep. It's crazy because Jokic didn't even roll. Like usually these bigs, when they're guarding this action,
he pops.
Yeah, Jokic pops. But even there, it's like I think Bam was like, oh, I might have to, rotate back.
Right.
If
like
he passes, he's like, oh,
he might roll late or something.
Just that little hesitation from
Christian.
Bam. Yeah, from Christian.
Oh, yeah.
His hesitation dribble, but then Bam's hesitation of like, should I go back to Jokic? Creates an opening.
We talked about this coverage in the Wolves series because that's what they were doing to Jamal like the whole time. They're like, all right, Jamal, you finish around the rim, you make a floater, like whatever it is. And Christian's like, oh, I'm going to get a dunk out of this.
Yeah, it's good that he like just stayed with it and wasn't like scared by the double that came, because usually you're like, young player.
And he's immediately passed back to Jokic like right now.
Yeah, and it's like a turnover because Bam was anticipating or whatever. It's like he stayed aggressive and he didn't. I think he's got to know that teams are going to, on average, lean towards Jokic in terms of gravity, and that those looks are going to be open.
If you could go to the next clip as well, they run the same thing. Except it's not off a DHO. He's just running the pick and roll. And then he's actually able to make the dump off pass to Hunter off a cut here, but then Haywood Highsmith recovers in time to force the turnover. But I was really impressed with both of those plays because obviously he gets a dunk out of one, and then he almost gets a play for what would have been a layup or a dunk for Hunter on the next one. And that was just a good read. So it's just another example of what I've been talking about with clearly the team knows, because they've been running a lot more pick and roll with Christian this year. They know they need another reliable ball handler, because I don't think that Russ is going to be playing high minutes in the playoffs, and Jamal can't do it literally all the time. Obviously, we have AG and Jokic, but just as many ball handlers on the court as possible who can operate in pick and roll, just do something to force a switch and then like get the ball to Jokic and like whatever it is, being comfortable running that. That is something that we didn't really see a ton of from KCP last year. They tried to do a little bit of it at the beginning of the season when Jamal was out, but KCP was clearly like pick and roll is not really like his thing. He would come off the DHO and like go for the midi. That was something that they were able to do because he was comfortable operating on the perimeter. Christian is operating off with an empty side so that he can get downhill. And that is a different dynamic as well for the offense. So that's like something in that plus column for Christian's offense for sure.
Mm-hmm. But before we get out of here, let's check around the rest of the league. We're going to look at the standings really quick and just get some early impressions because we made some tier lists and rankings in the offseason.
We sure did. And teams have already kind of surprised us in either direction so far.
Yeah. In the East, obviously,
Cavaliers.
The Cavs are undefeated, 12-0, number one seed. We want to look at the West. Obviously, the Thunder are in first, then the Suns, Warriors, and Nuggets at fourth, which is good to see for us. But I'm surprised by...
Let's go higher.
Yeah.
I'm greedy.
Very surprised by these two teams, the Suns and the Warriors. So let's just say based on like this early look and these returns this season, what is looking like the best preseason take that you have that wasn't necessarily popular?
Yeah, I think this is like a more lukewarm one because the Clippers are good. I think everyone expected them to be like out of the play-in, but they're in the play-in right now. I did say that they would make the playoffs and they still have time to do that. And who knows, like maybe Kawhi comes back at some point this season and they make a run. My prediction was predicated on like Kawhi's going to play like at least half the year, right? Who knows? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been really good on defense. And I think even like the Nuggets were really struggling offensively at the beginning of this season. Like there's no doubt about it. But the way that the Clippers were defending in that second game of the season for us just kind of confirmed what I thought they would look like defensively. Just very pesky, very stout. And then like Harden trying to run the show. The thing I didn't expect was like Norm Powell was going to have an all-star year. Shooting like 20 he's getting 26 points on like almost 70% true shooting right now,
Yeah.
and a lot of it off the dribble. Like it's not just catch and shoot, but he's obviously getting a lot of looks as well.
I was waiting for him when he got traded for to be like a huge problem. And with PG,
he's only a problem against us. Like
yeah.
I feel like he hits everything against us, but now he's hitting everything against everybody.
Yeah.
Couldn't hit anything in the clutch versus the Suns, which is why they're not 7-3 right now. But versus us, it was no problem.
But now he's going off, after PG's already gone and Kawhi's hurt again. So, it's tough for the Clippers still. They're in, ninth? But, yeah, good for Norm Powell.
Could be worse.
Yeah, it could be way worse.
They'd be the 3 seed in the East, by the way. The Kawhi-less Clippers.
Yeah, the 3 seed in the East is the Pacers right now, who is at 500.
Oh, wow, they got back to 500.
Everyone else is below good. 500. It's just
They had
atrocious.
A really slow start to their season. Yeah, so what was your victory lap, at least based on early returns, your best preseason take?
Either the Mavs or the Timberwolves. I mean, the Mavs are... The Mavs
I was thinking about those, like, I had these teams in A tier.
Well, I can't remember if we ranked the Timberwolves after the Cat trade or before. I think it was before because
it was well before. Yeah,
the trade was
that was
so
right
late.
Before preseason.
So I'll just say the Mavs. Like I've been like pretty like firm in me saying the Mavs didn't necessarily get better by adding Clay because I didn't think he was gonna be that good on offense and he was not gonna be good on defense. Man, he had some possessions against the Nuggets where he was completely lost ball watching, and then by the time he turned around to realize that he should maybe pay attention, someone already like back cut. And not that we scored off of that, but just watching him off ball, like even if he wasn't involved in the play, he was so lost.
You actually had the Mavs and the Wolves in A tier as well. I'm just gonna put that out there.
What else? Where did I got the Warriors and the Clippers probably pretty wrong.
Yeah, you had Warriors D tier and you had the Clippers C tier. So you had them better than the Warriors, but
I mean, I still think the Mavs are going to be okay. I mean, they just played us really well. Like we almost
and they're missing
lost
Lively. Like that's really the big thing. When they have Lively, they play at an over 50 win pace.
Yeah. I mean, record wise and in the standings, the Mavs are way worse off than even I was saying they would be. So I still think they'll be up there. Like they're going to be a playoff team for sure. But I still just the idea that I was saying they're not going to be as good as everyone's saying. Holding out hope that I'm still going to be right. So
I agree with that one for sure. This team is notorious for slow starts also. And part of it's because of Luka just having slow starts. But they also have these injuries that they're dealing with. I forgot to say PJ Washington didn't play in the game on Sunday either.
Yeah.
What do you think was your worst preseason take?
I mean, I feel like I have to say something about the Warriors just because.
Yeah, you have them D tier, man.
I was like, they don't know what they're doing. They need to make a trade. They're just going to be awful. They don't know how to like build around Steph. Buddy Hield's just been amazing. Steve Kerr is like having a very good simplified offense for these dudes to succeed. And they're winning. I think like they're pretty good defensively, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just. Yeah, I mean, they were just well coached, and it was like, it's kind of funny. The Lakers have fallen off a little bit. Of course, they had more of a hot start at the very, very beginning in like the first couple games. But these two teams were teams where everyone was saying they needed to make a trade desperately, who then, well, I mean, the Warriors did. They brought in Hield. But for the most part.
They reshaped their entire roster after letting Clay go.
But they have Pajemski, they still have Moody, they still have Kuminga, they still have Looney, they still have Steph. So like
not the entire roster. They reshaped the margins a lot more than the Lakers did, I guess I should say.
But those are two teams where I guess the Warriors are more consistent than the Lakers overall over time. The Lakers usually have a ton of turnover. This time it's the same team. Apparently the consistency coupled with just having a new coach in JJ Redick has been helping them. They've been falling off a bit recently, but the
Yes,
Warriors,
tough to be a head coach in the NBA.
yeah, the Warriors have, like you said, I think it's good to keep a consistency of the core and then rebuild around the margins and just like improve your chances and, widen your margin for error and all that. And I think the Warriors did do that, and I was wrong about that. So
Yeah. I was going to say that for me, I don't know if I was more wrong about the Warriors because I also had them D tier or about the Bucks, who I had as
God.
A tier, where the reasonable expectation is a competitive series in the conference finals. But they are sitting at, what was it? 14th in the Eastern Conference?
14th. They're
That's
2
crazy.
and 8.
That's actually crazy. Like the Washington Wizards have a better record than the Milwaukee Bucks right now.
Man, that is just really hard to understand.
That's tough. And like the gap between the East and the West just has continued from the last time we talked about it. And we will keep talking about it because it's absolutely mind-boggling that there are only 2 teams with a winning record in the Eastern Conference. Meanwhile, there are 10 in the Western Conference.
This could be the
Uh,
year where we finally convince Adam Silver to forego the conference seeding and just go
well, they won't do
global
it this
seeding.
year's
No,
playoffs.
but this season, like, if it's this bad,
The thing is, it's also in the
holy shit.
CBA. Like they need to change that.
That's true.
So, but they can change things mid-cycle.
Man,
They
we
just
need to
never
change
do.
the CBA. Like, everything, like, sooner than later. Please, there's so much that needs to happen. Like,
Maybe
this is
it
horrible.
comes with whenever the next expansion teams come and they're like, you know what, we're gonna add these teams and then we're gonna abolish
Yeah.
the conferences or at least abolish them for playoffs, or they just rewrite some because could be like they did in the bubble where the play-in was a thing, but it was only a thing if you met like a certain record. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we have conferences, but also we will get rid of them to like on the margin if like X number of teams don't have a 500 record or above, right? Like something like, because this is getting ridiculous. And it's like, okay, maybe like the lowest tier, like that's kind of the punishment. If you're like a lower tier Western Conference team, but you still have a winning record and there's like a bunch of like losing record teams in the East, your punishment is now you have to travel to the East Coast to do your playoffs. And then you have to compete in the playoffs in the East. But then you'll have a bunch of West teams like tanking so they can go compete in the Eastern Conference playoffs.
Damn, you got to think about that.
There'd be some like, there would definitely be some serious gaming the system in that instance. But I'd be here for all of it. I think it would be interesting.
It's crazy. The Spurs have a record good enough to be 4th in the East.
If it could get Wemby into the playoffs, Adam Silver might do it, actually.
There you go. See,
I'm just saying.
There's
Get
all
the whole
kinds of
country
incentives.
of France's eyeballs on those games. Like,
Want to grow the game.
yeah, we want to grow the game. That's what it is.
Yeah, get him in the playoffs.
That's absurd. East, get your shit together. At least get it back to where it was last year, to where it was like, be respectable. This is nasty.
It was kind of fun last year and competitive, and this is awful. Granted, some teams have been injured, but
get some winning records in the top 6.
Pacers, Magic. I think Magic would have had a winning record if not for Paolo's injury. So whatever. But damn, the Nets are in 5th, so they're like super panicking.
The Nets need to trade some guys because they're ruining their tank right now.
Ugh,
Give us Dennis Schroeder.
Yeah.
Please.
Take Zeke Naji. That is the best thing you could do.
Please. That'd be amazing. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, if you've made it to the this part of the show, thank you so much for enduring our Eastern Conference. It's not even slander anymore. It's just true. This is a good show, Will.
Yeah, very fun. Thanks for listening, everyone.
If you like our content, please do us a favor and hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and definitely subscribe. Leave us a review if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon Music, or just go over to there, hit the show page, and then give us a 5-star review anyway. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. On TikTok, we're what's.in.game.nba. And check out our clip channel on YouTube at What's in a Game NBA Clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing absolutely sucks.